Quote, to destroy those who destroy the earth, end quote. The meaning of Revelation 11 verse 18 by Ranko Stefanovic. Ranko Stefanovic, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of New Testament at the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, Andrews University, Berrien Springs, Michigan, United States. The expression, quote, to destroy those who destroy the earth, end quote, in Revelation 11 verse 18 has been popularly interpreted by Christian environmentalists in connection with ecological concerns and climate change. The assumption is that the text teaches that those who have abused and ruined the natural environment through exploitation are the object of God's wrath and will thus be held accountable on Judgment Day. Does Revelation 11 verse 18 actually address such ecological concerns? While the environment is not the topic of this article, we must keep in mind that God Himself issued the mandate to care for the natural environment. As humans are still under that divine directive, Christians in particular must set an example in environmental responsibilities. But where environmental abuse and exploitation of the earth's resources primarily on the mind of John, the inspired author, when he wrote Revelation 11 verse 18, this article seeks to answer that question. Resist the norm. As the French commentator Pierre Prigent observed, it is hard for Bible readers to resist imposing contemporary concerns on the biblical text instead of letting it speak for itself. In endeavoring to establish the meaning intended by the passage, we must remember three things. First, any understanding must not be defined by current concerns and events, but rather by biblical evidence. The Bible is its best interpreter. Second, a responsible interpretation arises from the text, exegesis, rather than from our imposing the meaning upon the text, eisegesis. Finally, it has been generally recognized that most of Revelation's language derives from the Old Testament. It is the Old Testament background text that will give us insight into the meaning of the statement, quote, to destroy those who destroy the earth, end quote. The literary context of Revelation 11 verse 18. Revelation 11 verse 18 serves as the bridge between the historical and eschatological halves of the book. As such, it functions as what is known as the springboard text. A characteristic of this literary feature of Revelation is that the springboard text concludes the previous section, while at the same time it introduces the following section. Almost every major section of Revelation is organized in this way. Thus, Revelation 11 verse 18 is such a springboard text. A closer look at verse 18 shows that it outlines the event elaborated upon in the second half of the book. 1. Quote, the nations were enraged, end quote. Such rage is the manifestation of the anger of Satan and his two allies, the sea beast and the earth beast, as they gather the world's nations for the eschatological battle of Armageddon. 2. Quote, your wrath came, end quote, points to God's response to the rage of the nations with His own wrath in terms of the 7 last plagues. 3. Quote, the time for the dead to be judged, end quote, points to Revelation chapter 20, verse 11 through 15, where the resurrected dead stand before God's throne and are being judged. This judgment includes both positive and negative aspects. The positive aspect of the judgment is stated as, quote, rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and those who fear your name, both small and great, end quote. Chapters 21 and 22 describe the actual reward. The author portrays the negative aspect as, quote, to destroy those who destroy the earth, end quote. The annihilation of Satan and his associates is the final act in the great controversy between good and evil. It will be observed that the negative side of God's judgment The destruction of the destroyers of the earth as a pouring out of his eschatological wrath is set in contrast to the rewarding of God's servants portrayed in the final 2 chapters of the book. The meaning of, quote, destroying the earth, end quote. In announcing the eschatological judgment, John the Revelator uses a play on words. Those who destroy the earth will themselves be destroyed. It reflects the principle of lex talionis, in which the punishment matches the crime committed. The concept is rooted in the, quote, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, end quote, pattern of the ancient Near Eastern judicial system. Revelation 11 verse 18 mirrors this ancient norm. The words translated as destroy both in Hebrew and Greek mean basically, quote, to destroy, end quote, although they are frequently translated in the sense of, quote, to ruin, end quote, or, quote, to corrupt, end quote, either physically or morally. Thus, for instance, Psalm 14 verse 1 speaks of a foolish man, quote, destroying, end quote, Shakath himself by saying that there is no God. While the New Testament primarily uses the word for physical destruction, Paul employs it in 1 Timothy 6 with reference to the corruption of the mind. In 1 Corinthians 3, Paul states that the destroyers of the temple of God will themselves be destroyed. However, the Greek word in Revelation 11 verse 18, diephthairo, has an intensive force meaning, quote, to destroy utterly / completely, end quote. At this point, the question arises as to what sense the earth is being destroyed in Revelation 11 verse 18. For one thing, it appears that the phrase, quote, to destroy those who destroy the earth, end quote, derives from 2 Old Testament texts. It appears that John the Revelator patterned the expression after the flood account in Genesis 6 verse 11 through 13 as they appear both in the Hebrew and Septuagint texts. Thus, both the Hebrew and Greek Septuagint of Genesis 6 employ the same play on words. Now the earth was corrupt, destroyed in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, destroyed, for humanity had destroyed its way upon the earth. Then God said to Noah, quote, the end of all humanity has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of people, and behold, I am about to destroy them with the earth, end quote. The parallels in the wording between Genesis 6 and Revelation 11 are obvious. Genesis 6 specifies that the antediluvians were destroying / corrupting the earth by filling it with, quote, violence, end quote, in the Hebrew, or, quote, iniquity, end quote, in the Septuagint. Their iniquity is further explicated in terms that, quote, the wickedness of mankind was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of their heart was only evil continually, end quote, so that the Lord, quote, was sorry that he had made mankind on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart, end quote. Thus, Genesis 6, 11 through 13 gives us the clue to the meaning of the destruction of the earth referred to in Revelation 11 verse 18. It appears that by drawing the phrasing from the Genesis pre-flood account, John wanted to show that the end-time destroyers will be destroying the earth in the manner of the antediluvians who are filling the earth with iniquity and violence. Just as the antediluvian destroyers had been destroyed with the earth, so will the faith of the earth's end-time destroyers. The end-time destroyers of the earth. Who are the end-time destroyers of the earth referred to in Revelation 11 verse 18? Revelation 19 verse 2 shows that this refers to the end-time Babylon, quote, the great prostitute who was corrupting the earth with her sexual immorality, end quote, in alliance with those who have sided with the end-time apostate religious system. Here, The reference to the end-time Babylon as the destroyer of the earth is patterned after Jeremiah's announcement of the judgment of ancient Babylon. Quote, "Behold, I am against you, the destroying mountain that destroys the whole earth." End quote. Thus, it is evident that Jeremiah's prophecy about ancient Babylon as the destroyer of the whole earth is an obvious source from which the author of Revelation has drawn the image of the end-time Babylon as the destroyer of the earth in Revelation 19 verse 2. Babylon in Revelation is the end-time ungodly system comprising of the dragon, the sea beast, and the land beast, the latter entity later referred to as the false prophet. This satanic triumvirate displays the arrogance and oppression of the historical Babylon portrayed in the Old Testament prophetic books. The end-time Babylon is said to have filled the earth with sins that have, quote, piled up as high as heaven, end quote, and that, quote, God has remembered her offenses, end quote, which mirrors the activities of the antediluvians in Genesis 6, verse 11 through 13. Like the historical Babylon, the end-time ungodly system is described in Revelation as the destroyers of the earth, where the author uses the, quote, earth, end quote, as a metonymy for, quote, the people of the earth, end quote. In alliance with the world's governing secular and political leaders, this end-time ungodly system is presented as the aggressor that unjustly exploits people on the earth for personal benefit and gain, thus destroying the lives of many. Just as God held ancient Babylon responsible for the crimes against his people, so the end-time Babylon is portrayed as the adversary of God's people and is guilty of shedding the blood of Christ's witnesses. This end-time ungodly system will be judged as much as ancient Babylon was to be judged. The book of Revelation shows that the judgment of the end-time Babylon and rebellious humanity is to take place at the end of history and will conclude after the millennium. Great controversy ends. A careful analysis of Revelation 11 verse 18 shows that the phrase, quote, to destroy those who destroy the earth, end quote, does not refer to environmental degradation and exploitation by modern technology, a frequent contemporary view. Rather, it points to the activities of the end-time Babylon, which in the manner of the antediluvians described in Genesis 6, fills the earth with sins that will have, quote, accumulated unto heaven, end quote, so that, quote, God has remembered her unrighteous acts, end quote. This end-time system bears all the characteristics of its ancient counterpart Babylon that Jeremiah labeled as the destroyer of the earth. The destroyers of the earth, the end-time Babylon, and those who associated themselves with it have led people away from God. Revelation presents them as powerful, ungodly forces that contribute to widespread corruption, violence, and oppression, as well as environmental devastation by their wicked actions. Rather than a literal physical annihilation of the earth here serving as a metonymy. They are the object of God's wrath and as such are themselves to be destroyed with the earth. Thus, the punishment they receive fits the crimes they committed. The judgment on this end-time satanic system will mark the conclusion of the great controversy between the forces of good and evil. For bibliographical and biblical references on this article and for much more content for pastors and church leaders, please visit ministrymagazine.org.